Should I get native or third-party lenses? This is a very common question that I see people asked on various forums, etc. of people saying, should I stick to native lenses or are third-party lenses okay? The problem with this question is that it's actually a giant misconception. See, native and third-party are actually very different ideologies. The extent of this misconception was actually highlighted to me a couple of weeks ago when on a Sony Facebook group that I'm a member of, someone asked the question to the group, what are native lenses, or what do you consider native lenses to be? And of the 200 or so responses, over 50% of those stated that they thought native Sony lenses was a lens made by Sony. And that's actually completely incorrect. So in this video, we're going to first address those misconceptions and work out what the different types of lenses actually are, and then we're going to discuss the pros and cons to the different types that there are. Firstly, native versus non-native. On any interchangeable lens camera, there is a lens mount on the front which allows you to take the lens off and put a lens on. But not all cameras use the same lens mount design. It varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. So this is a Sony E mount. Sony also have the A mount. Canon have the EF mount, the EFM mount, the RF mount. There's so many different ones to choose from. So in order to get a lens to fit onto this camera, it needs to have the corresponding lens mount on the back of it. So in this case, this is an E mount lens and an E mount body, and the two click together perfectly. This is a native E-mount lens, not because it's made by Sony, but because it can mount straight onto an E-mount body natively with no additional help. By comparison, this Sigma 35mm art lens isn't a native E-mount because the back plate isn't the corresponding design for an E-mount body. This is actually an EF mount for Canon DSLRs, which means that natively this is for Canon DSLRs, even though it's not made by Canon. If I wanted to mount this onto a Sony body, I would need an adapter. Now this particular adapter is the EF to E adapter, and that allows it to mount straight onto the camera body. Now this doesn't suddenly make the lens a native lens, it makes it an adapted lens, and that is the corresponding opposite to a native lens. You've either got a native lens or adapted lenses. Now the party of the lens is essentially, is the lens made by the same manufacturer that makes the camera or not? So this being a Sigma lens obviously isn't made by Sony, it's made by a third-party company, so thus it's a third-party lens. So this is a third-party adapted lens. This Tamron 28-75mm is still a third-party lens because it's not made by Sony, but it has an E-mount plate on the back which allows it to mount straight onto an E-mount body with no adapter, so this is a third-party native lens. If the lens is made by the same manufacturer that makes the camera body, namely Sony and Sony, then it's a first-party lens. So this is a first-party native E-mount lens. A Canon lens on a Canon body is a native first-party lens. But if you take that native first-party lens off the Canon and mount it onto an adapter and stick it on a Sony camera, it goes from being a native first-party lens to being an adapted third-party lens. But if you take that same Canon DSLR lens and mount it via a Canon adapter onto a Canon mirrorless body like the RF, then it becomes an adapted first-party lens. It's still first-party because it's Canon lens and Canon body, but it's not natively an RF lens, it's an adapted lens. Now, I realise that's probably being all a bit nitpicky, and when people say, should I buy native or third party, we know what they really mean. They're actually asking, should I buy first party or third party? But it can get quite confusing because you can have a lens that is both native and third party, or even first party and adapted. Now, the pros and cons to all of this, and firstly, let's tackle the third party versus first party argument, because this is what most people are generally trying to get their head around. The biggest difference between first and third party, and incidentally the difference between native and adapted, really comes down to the autofocus. In terms of optics and image quality, none of that is really down to whether the lens is made by the first-party manufacturer or a third-party manufacturer, whether it's adapted or whether it's native. That really just comes down to budget versus premium. How well has the company making the lens designed the optics? Have they tried to save money or have they gone all out with it? And in terms of the autofocus systems, again, the hardware with inside the lenses isn't really a factor from third and first party. That's just down to a case of budget. And high-end third-party lenses will still have faster AF motors than, say, budget first-party lenses. The problem or the potential issues come into how the lens is able to communicate with the camera. Because inside the camera body, there is obviously your autofocus system and processors with a bunch of algorithms that are designed to interpret all the information and work out what the camera is going to do next or how it's going to change the focus. But there's also a processing chip and algorithms inside the lens that needs to be able to communicate smoothly with the camera body. So the benefit of first-party lenses is that all the software, the algorithms that are inside the lens are being made by the same people who's made the camera body. So they have all the information that they need. They can make the lens to be really as good as it can be. That's not to say third-party lenses can't make them as good as first-party, but it can be potentially more tricky, because the third-party manufacturer obviously doesn't naturally have all the information from within the camera that the first-party manufacturer does. By trying to reverse engineer all the algorithms, there's the potential that it's not quite as fluent with the camera as a first-party lens would be. In essence, the algorithms is really no different than, say, languages. So if you imagine that the Sony body is talking Norwegian, and the Tamron lens is reverse engineered. I don't actually know if it is or it isn't, but let's pretend that Tamron have tried to reverse engineer all of the algorithms from Sony. So it's not quite fluent in Norwegian. It's like Swedish or Finnish. It's not completely fluent in Norwegian, but the languages are very close and you can generally try and interpret what the conversation is. It might just take a little bit longer for the communication to go through. Now, adapted versus native. So if we're pretending that all of these are talking in Scandinavian, then let's say that Canon lenses are talking in Spanish and reverse engineered third-party lenses are talking Portuguese. Again, the languages are very similar to each other, so for example, the Sigma lens can work on Canon DSLRs, but it might not be able to communicate quite as quickly and smoothly as a Spanish lens talking to a Spanish body. Disclaimer at this point, I know I'm probably going to get flamed by people saying that Portuguese is nothing like Spanish or, the Scandinavian languages are all very different. It's an analogy. It's probably a crap one, but we'll go with it. The problem with running adapted lenses is you then have a lens that is natively Portuguese talking, trying to speak to something that's talking in Norwegian, and that's where you need a translator. So the translator is going to have to take everything that's being spoken in Norwegian and convert it into Portuguese. And then likewise everything that's coming in Portuguese and convert it back to Norwegian. And that whole process takes even longer. Now, it's not bad in this combination because it's a Sigma adapter talking to a Sigma lens. So that's a native Portuguese talking to a native Portuguese translator who happens to also speak Norwegian. So this part of the conversation happens seamlessly. It's just this bit that takes a little bit longer. And then it goes even crazier if you're trying to use other third-party lenses with a different third-party adapter on a different body entirely. So for example, this Sigma adapter is designed to deal with Sigma lenses that are reverse engineered from Canon autofocus algorithms. So it can kind of half handle genuine Canon lenses, but not as well as it can handle Sigma lenses. But if you then try to take a completely different third-party Canon mount lens, for example, I recently tried the Yongnuo 35mm f1.4, which is a Canon DSLR lens, that's a different third-party manufacturer that's tried in their own way to reverse engineer Canon's autofocus algorithms, trying to communicate with someone else's interpretation of Canon's autofocus algorithms, and then trying to convert the whole lot into talking in Sony's autofocus algorithms. So that's like having a Spaniard trying to have a conversation with a Norwegian person, but the translator's deaf. I know. You came here for a video about native versus third party and we're now discussing world languages. I'm pretty sure this is the start of a mental breakdown. So in summary, native first party lenses are generally the smoothest working of all of them because it's all designed by the one manufacturer, everything's been designed to work seamlessly with each other, but it generally comes with the premium of a higher price tag. Native third party lenses can work almost as well as the first party lenses and isn't something you should automatically rule out, especially if it's a more mid to high end type of third party lens. Adapting other first party lenses like DSLR lenses onto mirrorless lenses with the same manufacturer is probably on par with using native third party lenses, because while everything's still first party so it all works pretty smoothly with each other, it's still having to go through an adapter, which creates a bit of a bottleneck. And generally the most unreliable of them all is adapting third-party lenses, and especially if the adapter is made by a different manufacturer than the maker of the lens. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Hopefully that's tried to iron out those misconceptions, or it's booked me a one-way ticket to a padded room. But as always, if you have any other questions or queries, the comment box is down below. While you're down there, if you haven't already, please consider hitting the subscribe button. And there is also not only my link to my Patreon account, but also my merch store as well. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.